Hey, dethroners, welcome back to the Dethroning Your Inner Critic podcast. And I'm very excited for the conversation today. I have with me Ken Blackman, who is a former Apple engineer turned relationship mindset coach and sex and intimacy educator. We're going to get into some juicy topics today. He is currently celebrating his 25th year helping couples co-create a thriving, fulfilling life partnership and a gourmet love life. And his work has garnered mentions in Business Insider, Playboy, Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour series, Cosmopolitan, and he is a regular featured contributor to the Good Men Project, Better Humans, Sexography, and his own Medium publication, The Craft of Intimate Coupledom. So welcome to the show, Ken.
So excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I love this conversation. Oh my goodness. Our inner critics wreak havoc in our relationships. And I always say the foundation of our life is our relationships, first starting with ourselves and then with everybody else. So first, let's get into you took my inner critic assessment.
Yeah.
And here were your scores. You had 75% inadequate inner critic, 75% guilty inner critic, 75% victim inner critic, and 25% restless inner critic. So let's just talk about you're in a relationship, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. You're married?
Yep.
And how long have you been married?
Happily so. 4 years.
4 years. Okay. So let's just talk about first this inadequate, guilty, victim, restless inner critic. How does your inner critic impact your marriage?
Yeah. So I tend to look for where I'm at fault. I'm much more likely to blame myself than my partner. And as you probably know, I imagine we'll get into this, but blaming yourself or blaming your partner is just kind of two sides of the same coin. And I tend to blame myself. I am always looking for how I could have done it better. So, just constantly question. I'm not constantly. I mean, like it's not that loud anymore. I kind of answered your questions from basically like my life journey.
Yes.
So fortunately, it is as loud as it used to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am very familiar with the patterns.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the difference between blaming oneself and taking personal responsibility and personal ownership, because those are two very different, very different places to come from. So what would you say is the difference?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the deciding factors is regret. In other words, retroactively judging yourself for having done it wrong in the past, rather than like this stance that a person can take where, like what I've been practicing recently is both of us, my wife and myself. And I think this is tautologically true. We're always doing the best we can at any given moment.
Yes.
So there are moments when she does something that I find annoying, or there's something where I feel like I let myself down or let my partner down.
Yeah.
And so the alternative to retroactively judging yourself wrong is to say, in that moment, I did the best that I could. And right now I learned something about how I could do it better.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do a lot of couples work. I actually went from, being in my private practice, I did a lot of couples work, and now my work has expanded. But one of the things that I think is instrumental in what you're saying is really understanding how our core wounds get in the way of what's occurring in our relationships. So can you talk about that just from your own personal experience? What do you think were your core wounds that have gotten in the way of either your current relationship, your past relationships?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I grew up in a house where my mother, my parents got divorced when I was 18 months old.
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up without a father around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my mother, I found out in adulthood, had been abused when she was young.
Yeah.
So she kind of went in the other direction and was very, very lenient with me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I grew up in a house where there was this big difference between the outside world and what happened at home. So there was a lot of kind of inherited shame that
Mm-hmm.
um, I didn't even know what we were ashamed of. I just inherited the stance of there's something about us to be ashamed about
Wow. Yeah.
without even knowing what it was that was so like horrible or bad about us, right? Like it was
Yeah.
just, like it was uncomfortable bringing friends over. I would usually go to their house,
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of the milieu that I grew up in, where there's something wrong with me and I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And so in my personal relationships, um, I, especially early on, before I was sadly terribly in need of some kind of coaching or training or work on myself.
Yeah.
And I constantly believed that I was just hopelessly unattractive. And
Mm-hmm.
that was my stance. I had reasons for it. I had concrete, like, I'm not tall, I'm not athletic, I'm not wealthy, I'm not charming, I'm not outgoing, all these things.
Yes.
Um, I would find out much later, as I worked on myself and my own self-image, that people tend to see me the way I see myself. So the
Yeah.
the huge breakthrough was how I saw myself, and then as that changed, then people related with me differently. But that
Absolutely.
was a huge thing for me, and it didn't really come till in my early 30s. And by the way, this was when I was a software engineer. I was so transformative for me that I was like, oh, this is the work I want to do in the world. So I left
Wow.
my career, studied with my own mentors, and learned everything that I could, and then started having clients of my own, because it was so transformative for me. I wanted other people to have a similar type of transformation.
That is so powerful what you're saying. So in other words, this is the way that I see this.
Yeah.
It was like the self that was created by the shame that you didn't even know was there, right?
Yeah.
You just were kind of operating on top of all of that shame, and it led you down one path and one career. And
Mm-hmm.
then once you did that work of sort of excavating, right? Maybe what you didn't even know needed excavating, right? But it's like what came to the surface is um shame, and like you got to the other side of that, and
Mm-hmm.
your entire sense of self, your entire sense of who you are, your entire sense of the purpose that you're meant to bring into the world, it's literally like just by
Discovering
doing.
myself.
Yes. I mean, just by doing your own inner work on your relationship with yourself, you are now sitting here a completely different human with a completely different trajectory of your life. And by the way, making a huge impact in the world with all of the clients that you work with, right? And the
That's
ripple
right.
effect that creates
Yeah,
out in
yeah.
that's huge.
And also, along with that, an understanding that what we, like in terms of relationships, all of the things that we believe are broken, not only about ourselves but are about our relationship, are
Yeah.
all they're not who we are. There's just no one taught us how to do relationships well, and so it's really huge. Yeah.
It's huge. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that the man that you were before you did all of this inner work on yourself would not have the marriage that you have.
I
Right?
mean, I was so I like to almost brag about how bad I was in this weird way because I was codependent. I
Mm,
was terribly needy. I
yeah.
put women on a pedestal, but I also kind of caricatured them, like I didn't actually see a real human being there. I
Right.
kind of treated women like kind of a video game, like what's the sequence of moves that I have to do in order to get the reward? And
Yes.
so I somehow managed to be like, they talk about nice guy syndrome. I
Uh-huh.
had
Uh-huh.
nice guy syndrome and I was misogynist at the same time.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So, and so I was living in this kind of cloud cover of being unlikable. I
Hmm.
couldn't really connect with women in any real way.
Yeah.
I simultaneously had strong desires and also didn't see them as like me. Like, I didn't treat them like, a human being that you can actually connect with.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I probably I imagine like the trajectory of that man, right? Like
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
still working in tech,
Mm.
probably would have gotten married in his late 30s or early 40s, would have had a terrible marriage, probably would have had kids, probably would have been unhappy in the marriage, might have gotten divorced. And throughout it, never would have known. Like I remember when I was younger in my teens and 20s, if a woman was interested in me, first of all, I didn't notice it. Then
Hmm.
if she came pounding on my door like, "Hey, I'm into you. Oh,
Yeah.
like let's connect." I didn't know why she liked me. I didn't know why she wanted to go out with me. I mean, I was thrilled. Like I was happy. Yeah, we're having a grand old time. I'm as happy as can be. I
Yeah.
wouldn't understand why she would get sick of all my behavior. I wouldn't know why she would eventually break up with me. So the whole trajectory of my relationships, when they happened, I was mostly alone, but when they happened, it was like, I don't know why it started. I don't know why it was so good. I don't know why it turned bad, and I don't know why it ended. And I was then heartbroken. So I was at the mercy of all of that mystery of what just happened to me. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I do, which would then, it's like a vicious cycle, right? Because
Yeah.
here you have all this shame. You don't even really recognize that it's shame, but your whole automatic focus is on let me figure out who I need to be so that this other person will love me, want me, choose me.
Right.
And then of course, that's a barrier to intimacy, right? They can't even get the real Ken. And so then
Right.
of course, eventually the relationship is going to break up, which then reinforces that inner shame that you're not lovable and you're not
Right.
valuable and worthy and there's something wrong with you. And um, you single-handedly broke that cycle within yourself that, by the way, Ken, if we're going to go back to your mother, and we don't
Mm.
even need to know to her, to like that kind of pain gets passed from generation to generation. So you single-handedly not only broke that cycle within yourself, but now have this beautiful wisdom that you're bringing to other people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is just incredibly, incredibly powerful. So let's kind of get into now. So, how do you help other couples, right? How do you help other people to really recognize their own core wounds that they might not even realize that they're bringing into their relationship?
One of the things that can happen in a relationship like this, when you have such a negative self image, is that you can end up with someone who, like, kind of agrees with your self image. So both people believe that this person is broken, right? I believe I'm broken, and my partner, they're so loving and they want to help and all this stuff, but they're still living in this shared belief that one person is broken.
Yep.
So the first thing that needs to happen is we need to break that whole cycle where both people are like, yeah, if only this one person in the relationship could break through some, like some stuck place. So one of the things that I do paradoxically is I just start relating to both people as if they're right exactly the way they are. I start having them feel their own inherent rightness so that they can feel what it feels like to not be judged. I actually had a client literally this week tell me, because we've been working together for a while, and one of the we were talking about where they started. Where they're at now is learning the subtleties of where they throw each other still under the bus a little bit. Like, it's subtle. They've been working on this for so long, but there's little places where I remind them of what it feels like to be a right person, even when you're making mistakes, even when you're wrong, even when you have to apologize. You don't lose your inner rightness.
Right.
But she said to me, yeah, that it's amazing that we're working on that. But I remember when we started, I was selfishly like learning from the way you treated me like I was a right human being. And I said, yeah, you had to learn that first. You had to learn, you had to stop like beating yourself up. And so just the way I had them feel right about themselves, no matter what they brought to the table, like,
Right.
yeah, I can understand how that happened. I can understand that. That must have been really, that must have been really painful. Whatever it was, I
Yes.
never let them throw themselves under the bus. And then later they learned to do that with each other. Like, oh, you're a right human being. I'm a right human being. And that's where they're at, these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah. So when you say, right human being, do you mean that you're really helping them to understand that they already are whole, they already are
Yeah.
enough, they're right
Yeah.
there, there's nothing broken, there's nothing that they have
Yeah.
to fix or change within themselves. Yeah.
That's
Um,
right. There's
yeah.
different wordings that people can use to describe this same thing. I'm sure you and your audience have a whole languaging around this. I happen to use the language of inner rightness,
Uh-huh.
where it's a kind of a, if I were to define it, it's a kind of inner acceptance and kind of a baseline of approval of yourself that
Yes.
doesn't require you to never make mistakes. It isn't based on other people's approval. It
Mhm.
isn't based on some high standard, like I have to never make a mistake in order to just walk around like I'm a right human being.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about before, where your identity, one of the things I had to learn was not to try and source my self identity from the women that I was dating. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yeah.
So that was a huge thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I know I experience this a lot in my work with couples, and I'm wondering if you do too. Where, the couple comes and they say, right, like, I really want my relationship to get better, and I have this vision for what I want in the relationship. But they are so right. I mean this not in the right
In the
human being
not good way.
language. Yeah, but like, they are really right about how wrong their partner is. And if
Yeah.
their partner would just be more of this and be less of that and do this and do that, how do you disentangle people from that?
Well, I like to call myself a relationship mindset coach. So there's a few approaches that you can take with this. One of them is, and this happens to be not an approach that I take, but it might be one that you or your audience is familiar with, known as nonviolent communication,
Mm-hmm.
where you're given a structure for how to communicate that kind of brings forth the underlying issues. Like, here's where I got hurt. Here's, what, the feelings that I'm having. Here's my request in the future. And instead of doing it from the communication to the mindset, I tend to work from the mindset, and then their style of communication automatically starts to embody some of the things that are talked about in nonviolent communication. So a lot of it is just talking to them. Like, basically what I do is I ask questions, and I ask questions, and I ask questions, and I ask questions until I'm seeing the world through their eyes. Like, I understand what they're thinking and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
I get it, right? Then
Yeah.
I'm asking questions of the other person, like, and I just keep asking questions, asking questions, asking questions until I see the world through their eyes. And
Mm-hmm.
now I can do a couple things. I can do translation. So this person said this to me, then I model like saying the same thing to this other person.
Yes.
And the other person's like, "Oh, that makes so much sense." And they're
Mm,
like, "You just said exactly what I've been saying for years. Why do you hear it from Ken? And like, I've been saying this, why don't you listen to me?" And so we get to see what the subtleties are. We don't break down the communication, but usually literally all I did was talk to the other person, saying exactly what I heard
yes.
from the point of view that they are a right human being and I'm a right human being. So like,
Mm,
I'm clear that there's nothing wrong with what I'm feeling. I'm not ashamed of what I'm feeling. I'm
yeah.
not like blaming this person, or like, I might be angry,
Yep.
but I hold my, this is languaging actually that I learned from my wife. I hold
Yeah.
my high regard for the other person. And
Yeah.
it comes through, like, I have high regard. I'm angry at you and you did this thing and I'm really hurting, but the way that I'm talking to you still maintains my high regard for this person.
Yeah.
And they get to see that modeled, and they start to see, oh, I see how I started to be contemptuous of you. I started to think that you were, an idiot. I
Yeah.
started to think that you're incapable. I started to think you're never going to, whatever the thought is, like, through this process, they start to see their thought patterns, what they thought of the other person that
Yes.
cause them to speak this way, and they
Mm,
start to actually be able to hold unwavering high regard for each other
yes.
through the full range of emotions that a person can have. It's not that you're trying not to be angry, it's not that you're not trying to be hurt, it's that you are having that full range of experiences and that full range of emotions while having high regard for yourself and having high regard for your other person. And from that place, all of the like nonviolent communication things just kind of naturally spill forth from them. It's amazing to witness.
That's it. It is. And so I love what you're saying. The way that I describe it is that you're literally, it's like you are changing the lens through which you're seeing yourself and the lens through which you're seeing your partner. So,
Yep.
right, right, which changes the way that right, even if there's an issue to resolve, it changes the way that you communicate the issue, and then in turn changes how that other person responds to you. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really right. And it goes back to what we were saying about your personal transformation. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the way that we can really have the relationships that we want, I've been married almost 27 years, and
Yeah.
right, and I am, I'm very proud to say that I am more in love with my husband today than ever before, and I think he is with me, and that's because of the work that we have done, right? I mean, it is
Mm-hmm.
really that we've got to keep evolving in our personal relationship with ourselves, and then also right together as a couple.
Yeah.
So you mentioned something I was reading that you mentioned something from a relationship going from the experience of work to flow.
Mm.
Can
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can
yeah.
you describe that process?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite topics these days. So
Mm,
my wife and I realized we had this realization that like because we see people talking about, you really have to work at your relationship. And I don't think that's not true. I don't think it's not true that you have to work at it. But there's a way that people said it that didn't sit right with me. And I had a conversation with my wife about it, and we realized that neither of us ever experience it like it's work.
mm,
Now we do all the things that couples talk about when they like we have difficult conversations. We say uncomfortable things to the
yeah.
other person about what we notice about them. We have uncomfortable admissions about ourselves that we're like
Mm,
places where we were ashamed of ourselves. We call each other out. We do all these things that people mean when they say work, but we don't experience it like work. And I was scratching my head for a while, like, what's the difference there?
mm,
And then I came across this line. Someone said just in passing, like, yeah, we're in relationship to get our needs met. And I thought, that makes sense, and it is not at all what I believe. I do not approach my relationship like I'm here to get my needs met.
yeah.
I don't teach people that they're in how to get their needs met. That's just simply not in my mindset. I don't
Yeah.
write about it. I don't coach from that place. And I thought, oh, that's the difference. And
Yes.
so to explain this, um, I'll use actual a job as the comparison. So if
Hmm.
you go to a job, you do the work that you're supposed to do. You're not there to like your job. You're there to make a paycheck. It's a reasonable, like you're happy with this arrangement. Your boss is happy with this arrangement. They're getting the work done. You're getting a paycheck. There's no complaints about it, but it feels like work because it is work. It is an extrinsic motivation. You're
Uh-huh.
doing it to get something
Hmm.
rather than the things that you do because you enjoy them.
Mm, mm,
And that's intrinsic motivations, the things that you do because you enjoy doing them.
mm.
And so there's this thing that nobody talks about, which is you can like the perks of a relationship. You can like what you get from the relationship, but not actually like relationship. So
Mm.
you're in it for that extrinsic payoff. And
Yeah.
that is what turns it into work. And what I realize is my wife and I love the whole process. Even like we might get angry, we might argue, we might sit in extreme discomfort with something that we heard that we didn't like.
Yeah.
But underneath it all, like I enjoy every minute of it. Like
Mm.
doing relationship is my jam.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like a mountain climber. A mountain climber is doing hard things, but they
Yes.
love what they do. And so you
Yes.
can love doing relationship and then it never feels like work. That's
Yep.
kind of the summary of that whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. What I'm hearing in what you're saying is that it's really, the relationship serves as a mirror for us, right?
Hmm.
So we've got to really be willing to see all the parts of us, right?
Hmm.
We've got to be willing to see it, to own it. And to your point, use the discomfort, use
Hmm.
the anger, use the frustration, use the uncomfortable emotions as much of a catalyst of, you know, strengthening our relationship as the good times. And I think to your point, that's like one of the biggest problems is that we are, as human beings, we are hardwired to want to avoid the uncomfortable. So when something shows up in a relationship where we're triggered, we feel angry, we feel not heard, not seen, not valued, not loved, not important. And rather than being willing to really kind of do that work to look at that, we just want to dump that onto, and blame the other person for that. And I think that's where a
Yeah.
lot of couples, a lot of relationships get into this, um, unhealthy dynamic,
Yeah.
right?
I give people this exercise, like make a list for yourself. Like your partner is never going to see this list, so you can be honest with yourself. Make a
Mhm.
list of all the things you do to get the reward or to avoid the negative consequence.
Mhm.
Then make a list of all the things you do because you enjoy doing them and start to get a sense of to what degree are you extrinsically motivated, like doing things you don't like to do in order to get things that you want
Yeah.
versus actually having it be something that you enjoy doing. And the first time that I really started exploring this, I had a client who happened to be a skateboarder, and we were talking, and I hit on this thing where it's like this relationship isn't any harder than you learning, and like you'll spend the whole day learning a new like you'll pick something, a very difficult trick to do, very difficult, and you'll
Mhm.
work at it, you'll go up, you'll fall, you'll go up, you'll fall. Like, how is it that that whole day or that whole 3 days you worked at to get this one move, and as soon as you learn the move, you're
Mhm.
off to the next move?
Yeah.
So it was really the whole process that was the experience. Why do you feel so differently about that than you do about the process of the relationship?
Yeah.
And something clicked with him, and he started to treat his relationship more like a passion project, something he loves to do,
Mhm.
rather than a job that he does things he doesn't like to get to some payoff of what he does want or to avoid some bad thing that he doesn't want. And
Mm.
it really shifted things.
That's fascinating. That is
Yeah.
fascinating. Let's get into the topic of sex.
Okay.
So, how do we have a sex life that gets progressively better over time?
Okay. As you can imagine, we could spend a whole hour talking about this.
Yes, we can. Yep.
So we'll cover as many things as we can. The first thing is a metaphor that I want to share with your audience.
Mhm.
So imagine that um, as a couple, you cook dinner, you cook dinner together and eat dinner, 2 or 3 times a week. Like it's just a ritual that you have where you cook dinner. You cook dinner together and enjoy a meal together. Now it's not a big deal, but the first thing you need to figure out is there's foods that I can't eat. There's foods I love. There's foods that I hate. And your list is different from mine. So, how are we going to cook a meal that gives you all the things that you want? It's a delicious meal that doesn't have any of the things that you don't like,
Mm.
and your partner as well. So
Mhm.
you figure out how to do that. And it's the same thing in the bedroom. Like I am a big proponent of not doing anything that doesn't feel good to your body. So how do you go into the bedroom and both people get up from the bed totally satisfied and not having done anything that they didn't enjoy? Like you have to figure it out, just like you figure out dinner. But when it comes to dinner, you figure it out pretty quickly. That is step one. That's step one.
Right.
So going back to the dinner analogy, you figure that out. Now you're cooking meals. Now you start to explore different cuisines. You get a new knife that's a better for cutting the onions. You try this herb. Oh, hey, I tried this recipe. The recipe was good, but I think I can tweak it. That's going to be better that's going to be more delicious. And slowly over, months and years of just doing this ritual, like there was no drama. There was no like, you didn't have to become an Olympic athlete. You didn't have to, like do like you just were yourself and your partner was themselves and you did it together and you talked about the experience and you like figured out what you like and what you don't like. You become better cooks. You figure out your flow in the kitchen. Like I'm really good at the asparagus. My partner is really good at cooking the steak, or vice versa. You got your dance now in the kitchen of who's good at what. And pretty soon after 5 years, those meals are dialed in and they're better than what you can get in a restaurant. Like we talk about how grandma was such a fantastic cook. Well, how did she get? All she did was put her attention on it on a regular basis. And so I think the default is that a sex life can get better over time, where you guys are so dialed in that you wouldn't want to start from scratch with someone new, like an attractive body or whatever you thought, or variety, whatever you thought was actually what makes sex good. It's actually, no, it's the connection. It's how well you know each other's bodies. It's like the communication that takes place. It's the co-experiencing. Like I'm experiencing my partner's pleasure. My partner's experiencing my pleasure. And there's this loop. So the relationship gets progressively better until like, yeah, I wouldn't want to start from scratch with someone new, like there isn't anyone that I would want to be with. I like what I got at home. So just,
Yeah.
we can start with that analogy and then go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's a lot of, I think a lot of the things that happen when it comes to sex is that, there's sort of that cliche, men want sex more than women, and women want to feel connected, right? Women want to feel connected before they can have sex, and men, want to have sex so they can feel connected, and they're just,
Yeah.
not on the same page. How do you deal with that with couples?
Yeah. So I think we have it wrong. Um, and here's where we can start with this. So when people turn to technology, what technology do they turn to? So men typically turn to porn. Not that women don't like porn. Women like porn too, but it's mostly like the audience for porn is mostly men.
Yeah.
Women turn mostly to vibrators,
Mm-hmm.
right? The sex toy industry is mostly driven by women.
Yeah.
So what does that tell us? For women, what it tells us is there's a very important component of physical pleasure, like proper clitoral stimulation is like, we say women need connection. Yes, absolutely, that's true. But there's a whole component of pleasurable touch and physical, like somatic pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
that often gets thrown under the bus for women just because of how how our society treats sex.
Yeah.
So that's women. Now we can look at men and say, what is it about, like they use porn, if they use a toy, it might be like there's these sex dolls, or they might
Mm-hmm.
turn to a sex worker. What do all
Yeah.
those things have in common? It's another human being, either on the screen
Mm.
or another human being with whom to have the experience. So they're
Yeah.
either co-experiencing other people's sex or co-experiencing something with another human being.
Yeah.
And so I thought about this for a long time, and here's the best explanation that I've come up with. It matches what I see inside the bedroom and outside the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
That men have easy access to somatic pleasure, physical pleasure. That's the easy part. If it was just about physical pleasure, I wouldn't need a partner. I would just do it myself. But
Right.
there's a missing component of the connection with another human being. Like the missing ingredient, the thing we as men hunger for is empathetic enjoyment.
Yeah.
And women are the opposite. So women, like, if it was just about like manifesting a partner to have sex with, like a healthy adult woman can go out and manifest a partner to have sex with her pretty quickly.
Yep.
But it's probably not going to be very good sex because women often experience more like that empathetic thing. They often experience vicarious, like their
Yep.
partner is getting more pleasure from it than they are.
Mm-hmm.
So the missing ingredient is actually, is the sex as good for them at a somatic level? Is it as physically pleasurable for them as it is for men?
Right.
So women have easy access to empathetic pleasure. It's like they get shortchanged on the physical pleasure,
Yeah.
and men have easy access to physical pleasure, but what they crave is the empathetic piece. That's
Yeah.
that's my way of understanding it. And
Mm-hmm.
when I have couples look at that, they tend to actually, everything starts to balance out.
Right. So, as you're talking, I mean, I'm going back to, even what you were saying about yourself, right? About all that shame that
Mm,
you brought from your childhood that was hidden. And thank goodness you were willing to look at that.
yeah,
And I think for men, even more so than women, I think sort of, there's sort of this cultural phenomenon, I guess, where men are not allowed or encouraged to talk about their shame. They're not encouraged to talk about their vulnerability. Women, um, we at least have, like, we'll talk about it with our girlfriends or our, people that are really close to us. Men tend to keep that so hidden. And I
mm,
think that I'm wondering if you see that amongst men where they're so guarded and protected
yeah,
against their own pain that they won't let their partner in emotionally, and then of
yeah,
course that impacts the physical connection as well.
yeah. It's a this is a terribly mixed metaphor, but it is a double-edged sword, and
Hmm.
it is a vicious cycle. I know that's a terrible mixed metaphor, but I'll explain both.
Right.
First of all, we men are told that our value is in our productivity.
Yes.
And we're subtly told that emotions are in the way of rationality, productivity, what we can produce.
Yeah.
And so away from we're trained that the emotions are an inconvenience
Yes.
that are in the way, and it would be best if we can just ignore them and trudge forward. That's how
Yeah.
we are conditioned to be.
Yep.
And and in a way that isn't so much applied to women, right? So here we are, we're in a relationship. I'm being stoic and trying to do what I think is the right thing. Now, mind you, by the time we're adults, this is so deeply ingrained, it's the water we swim in. We're not even conscious of it. And
Right.
our partner is saying, I can't feel you. Like, I want to be able to feel you. Can you share with me the like, I'm sure you have feelings about stuff. And sometimes, depending on the woman, will kind of poke at stuff, like trying to evoke or trying to provoke,
Sure.
just so that you can feel that, like, if a guy has an identity where he doesn't get angry, which was
Yeah.
me.
Mm.
I would often get into relationships where a woman would start poking at me and provoking me until they could feel me get angry, and then there's like this paradoxical to me that I didn't understand, this breath of fresh air, like, oh my god, I can finally feel you, right?
Yeah.
So there's all this going on, right? Now
Yeah.
she says, I want to be able to feel you. I want to know your inner thoughts or feelings. And once the man gets past, well, I don't have feelings, like, I don't like, and he really starts to, like, way down there in the basement is these feelings, and they feel like a monster. So
Yeah.
he's like, okay, I'm going to open my door a crack and let you feel what's in here.
Yeah.
And what comes out is, because we haven't been processing our emotions. It's this young child. And now all of a sudden she's like, oh no, that's not what I didn't want to be dating a child. I didn't want to be
Mm.
emotionally fucking excuse me,
Nope, you
emotionally
first. Yeah. Yeah.
emotionally managing this
Yeah.
child. That's not what I had in mind.
Yeah.
So now we're like, you got me to open the door, then
Right.
you told me I did it wrong. Like, so
Mhm.
because we haven't done the work, we haven't been trained to become emotionally mature human being. What she thinks when she says, I want your emotions, is very different from what he has inside there, because he still has, he's still basically emotionally a 7-year-old or a 14-year-old. And so that's the like the double bind that men are in.
Absolutely. And the thing is, Ken, we all are, right? I mean, if we're not doing our inner work,
Mm-hmm.
then we're really in many ways, in many areas of our relationship, we are stuck at that age, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
where that pain first began. And
Mm-hmm.
so I really love what you're saying, in that I think women need to make room for the little boy in their partner to emerge.
Yeah.
We need to, as women, we need to embrace a man's vulnerability, a man's pain, a man's, shame.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of people, I do work separately with men and women. I have programs for men and I have programs for women. And people say to me, why don't you put the two together? And that's exactly why. Because men are not going to talk about their vulnerability and their pain and their shame when women are present. They have a hard enough
Yeah.
time doing it when it's just with men. So it's interesting. And it's such a shame that we're not talking about this more in our culture, right? This is like
Yeah.
really this is fundamental, right, to healing, is
Yeah.
our ability to be able to see that.
I will admit that I have very mixed feelings here, because on the one hand, we've been talking most of this whole time about your capacity to accept yourself the way you are, and your capacity to accept your partner the way they are. And that includes, as we're talking about now, that little child within your partner that never got, on the one hand, all of that is true. On the other hand, if we look at the patterns that we're just now trying to break out of the older model of masculine feminine like dynamics,
Hmm.
women have been in charge of men's emotions for a long time, and put given the responsibility for having men who aren't in charge of their own emotions, like that. All of that emotional work has been kind of outsourced to women. Like in the older model, well, like we can name what his job is. His job is to provide, to protect, to procreate, to be. His role is to be the rational, like head of household. Like, like there was a TV show called Father Knows Best.
Oh,
That was the model, right?
yep,
He's
yep,
he's rational. He's the
yep,
decision maker. He's the provider. He's
right,
like the head of the household, right?
right, right.
So relative to that, what is her role? Her role, as best I can understand it, is to be uh, the emotional provider for everyone in the family. Like,
Yeah,
she's failing in her job if she's not making him feel good. That is
yeah,
like that is her job, is to be the emotional kind of like manager, to
yeah,
manage everyone's emotions in the household. So
yeah.
I'm dedicated to breaking us out of that pattern. So there is a balance here. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. It's, you know, to your point, both of those roles, whether you're talking about the typical masculine role or the feminine role, it is it number one, it's impossible to actually, be that in real life for both sides. And it has both people not showing up being real, being authentic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It does a
Yeah,
disservice to both people.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that still very much goes on today, right? I
Yeah.
think, where women are always, I don't want to say always, but I think that we are kind of hardwired condition to keep looking outside of ourselves. Are people happy with us? Or, are we making them happy? Are they disappointed? Are they upset? Right. So we're always sort of checking in. How are we doing with how are other people's emotions? Or how do we perceive that other people are, experiencing us?
Yeah.
And men are, really more driven towards, to your point, I've got to produce and but I'm not going to let my emotions get in the way. So
Right.
they're everyone's focused outside, but you know men are focused on productivity, women are focused on other people's emotions, and it is damaging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll speak to that from my own experience. So admittedly, like a lot of the work that I had to do was to wean myself off of the tendency to source my rightness, my own self sense of identity, and my confidence and my belief in myself and my approval of myself from women. Like if a woman loved me, I was amazing, and if a woman didn't like me, I was a piece of shit. So I had to wean myself off of that, right?
Yes.
But having made that shift and then being able to have real conversations with women and the things that women have told me, like
Mm,
there was a period of time during which, because where I started in my professional work was what happens in the bedroom and how can people have a better sex life. And
mm,
so we would set things up so that we're gonna have an evening where all she has to do is lie down, relax. He's gonna pleasure her the best he knows how. All she has to do is give him some adjustments, give him some instructions, tell him what she likes and what she doesn't like. He's gonna
mm.
put all his attention on her pleasure. She's gonna put all her attention on her pleasure. There's not going to be anything owed or any like reciprocity. This is its complete experience for both people, right? We
Yeah.
set this up.
Mhm.
And what happens in that situation? So many women told me I couldn't do it. I was so nervous. I was so uncomfortable. My mind was racing with, am I breathing right? Should I be moaning right now? Like, how is he like? Is this experience pleasurable for him? Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it is so deeply ingrained in women that in a way that I as a man couldn't understand. Like I will like it like I hear it and I empathize with it, but I like it is so deeply ingrained that your sex is for the other person, not for
Mm,
yourself. And
mhm.
so and that goes through life where from what I've heard from women, they're like, I am so geared from childhood to be about other people.
Yes.
And so that is something else that I try really hard to dismantle when I see it in relationships.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what you're really illustrating here, okay, is that you use the backdrop of relationships to really heal, you know, what men and women are taking with them, that has been passed on from, one generation to the next, right? A pain that we're not even aware of,
Yeah.
that we're bringing into not just our relationships, but sort of bringing into our life, in general. And
Yeah.
I think that's why the work that you do is so important and so powerful, because we really can use our relationships to heal ourselves, because that's really how we have the life that we want. That's how we have the relationships that we want. That's how we have the sex that we want. We got to first do the work on ourselves, and then, and that ripples. So it's really, really powerful work that you're doing in the world. Where can people find out more information about you if they want to, work with you? Where can they find you?
So you can go to kenblackman.com, which is my personal website. I also do a lot of writing, and if you resonated with any of the stuff that we talked about in this episode, a lot of that stuff is I go into a lot more detail about the cooking metaphor, about empathetic versus somatic pleasure, about a lot of the stuff that we talked about. On my blog on medium.com. And so if you look for, or hopefully you'll provide the link, but if you don't have it, go to on medium.com, look for The Craft of Intimate Coupledom. And you'll find a lot of writing that I've done on these and other topics, on sex, relationships, the whole thing about how relationships are work. All of that is there in greater detail. So yeah.
Thank you for this really important conversation, and thanks for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the work you're doing in the world. It's much needed.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone.